Welcome to labminz.com and our lab video series on Cisco ISE 3.0. This is Matha, your instructor for this video series. For a complete list of our ISE videos, you can visit our website under the security section. There you can also sign up for our newsletters to receive the latest video updates. At this point, from what we've learned in the last video, you should have already picked a deployment type as well as the appliance model. If you are going with the physical appliances, whether they are 3615, 55, or 95, you can just order them with the ISE version that you want and you should be good to go then. But if you decide to use the virtual appliance, then you would need to make sure that the VMs are sized properly, and you also need to still perform the installation of the VM. So in this video, we are going to go through an installation of Cisco ISE virtual machine on VMware ESXi. While we let the installation running, we will spend some time covering the topic of ISE licensing, which is always fun. As you know, ISE comes with tons of capabilities, but some of those capabilities cannot be enabled unless you have the proper licenses installed. This will help you understand the ISE licensing model, so you know which type of the license to purchase for the features that you need. When it comes to sizing your ISE VM, you basically just matched the VM resources to those of the physical appliance model that you chose in your deployment design. As of ISE version 9.3, I believe Cisco provided an OVA file that has all the hardware resources predefined to eliminate the problem with the insufficient resources allocation, and this includes the CPU, memory, and even disk space. There are actually multiple OVA files with different disk space, as the monitoring node requires usually more disk space than the other, and you just need to know how to pick the right one, and we will see this in a little bit. First, let's take a look at the VM requirements that you can anticipate from an ISE VM. I'm going to bring up a Cisco document right here, which is a Cisco ISE 3.0 installation and upgrade guide. And there's a section right here for the virtual machine requirements. If you can look further down in this document, you can see these are some of the samples of the .ova, as you can see right there. From the naming convention standpoints, these are the equivalent physical appliances, like this one right here is 3615 or the 55, and the value right behind it, that's the size of the disk space, right? This guy has 300 gig, this one is 600, and that's 1.2 terabyte. If you look at this table right here, you can see the list of requirements for the CPU, memory, and disk space perspective. For the CPU, you can see if you are dealing with the small in this case is the 3615, the medium is the 55, and the large is the 95, just FYI. You see that the Cisco recommend having 16, 24, and 24 CPUs for those respective appliances. There's also little notes right here that the number of the core right here is twice of those that you find in the physical appliance because of the hyper-threading. So just FYI on those. From the memory perspective, if you just do the eval, you only need the 16 gig, but for the small, you need 32, then 96, and the large, you need the 256 gig. From the hard disk perspective, the eval, I'm not sure if this is still true. I believe the new OVA now requires 300, but anyway, it shows 200 right here. But again, it will be controlled by the OVA that you download, so you don't have to worry about it as much. Just say that you need 300. So you can see from production, 300 up to 2.4 terabyte disk storage, and that depends on the deployments and the tasks of the ISE nodes. So this will give you a general ideas of what a given size ISE VM would require from the resource perspective. And you can read through this. There's a storage and file system requirement, disk controller, and the NIC, which supports both E1000 and VMX-Net3. There's also an equivalent table for the Linux KVM, as well as the Hyper-V, which are the hypervisor. They are supported by the ISE VM. And there's some recommendation you can read through as well, coming all the way down to the disk space requirement, which is as important. And you can see based on the persona on an ISE node, from the standalone to the distributed to the dedicated admin monitoring, PSN, PXGrid, or a co-located admin monitoring. You can see the minimum disk size is 200. For the eval, I guess for eval 200 is okay, and then for the production, these are the minimum disks, which would have been dictated by the OVA. But if you deal with the monitoring node, then you might want to pay a little bit of attention as far as the additional disk space that you may need, and this will depend on the lock retention, which is, again, there's a table down below that will give you some guidelines as far as how number of endpoints that you have, and given a disk size, how long you can expect the lock to be kept. I believe this is in a number of days. And again, this is the guideline, it's not a hard rule or anything. And you can see that for the monitoring node, there's an option to increase the disk size all the way up to 2.4 terabyte. Okay, maximum disk space 2.4. I would say that for the monitoring node in particular, if you can spare additional disk space, you might want to, especially in the larger deployment, give it a maximum if you can. All right, so make sure you kind of familiarize yourself with the VM requirements. Even though the resources, like I said, are defined in the OVA, it is not a bad idea to get some idea of the requirements so you can correctly communicate that to your VMware admin. All right, so now let's move on to our lab. Let me close that out. Before we get into the installation part of the lab, let's take a quick review of our lab setup. Here we have our ICE, our Identity Services Engine, ICE1 or LM-ICE1 that I have already prepped and installed, right, ready to go. It's a fresh install, so we haven't really done any kind of configuration, just the initial initialization that we went through. What we're going to be doing in this lab is to go through an installation of ICE number 2 right here with the IP address of 172.16.32.103. And by the way, the ICE 1 has the IP of .102, right? And that's on the VLAN 32, which is our server VLAN. And the server that we also have that VLAN, which is our Windows 2019 domain controller. Right? And also it's going to act as the NS server that we use as part of our ICE installation that has the IP of 32.40. We have a core switch, switch 1, that has a loopback IP of 172.16.0.1. It's running NTP service, so we'll use it as our NTP server as well. Then it has connections to an internet, so if our ICE needs to reach out to an internet for anything, then we'll be able to do that. All right, pretty straightforward setup here. There are some prerequisites that you need to take care of before you can begin the installation. First, you need to have a functioning VMware ESXi running version 5.1 update 2 or 6.x at minimum. For us, let me bring up the jump host, which is our Windows 2019 over here that we use as a jump box. We are actually running, I believe it's a version, I'll tell you in a second, 6.update 3, so it's pretty recent. Okay, and that's what we're going to use for the lab. Then you need to download the ICE 3.0 software, either in an ISO or OVA, with OVA being preferable. ISO, usually you use that for your physical appliances. All right, so if you deal with the physical appliance, then the ICE should come with the pre-install version, but for whatever reason you need to reinstall from scratch, maybe the version that comes with is older than what you want or different than what you want, then you would need to get the ISO file mounted on the virtual DVD on the UCS CIMC and then perform the installation that way. Right? Otherwise, for the virtual appliances, it's recommended to download one of the OVA files and then make sure that you deployed it from the computer that has the high-speed LAN connection to the ESXi server, as you're going to be uploading. What's the latest file size right now? Let's take a look. Like for the 3.0 OVA, yep, we are in the range of 15 gig, and that's where you're going to be pushing it real time during the installation from your machine to your ESXi server. Right, so make sure you have a good connection there. As you can see from this ICE software download page for the 3.0, there are many choices of OVA to choose from, and we can take a look at what's available. Right, the first one right at the top right here, which is 300 gig in the disk size, and you can see that it tells you even that it's recommended to be used for eval small and medium size appliance. And this is the one that we're going to be using in the lab. Okay, so if you have an ICE node that needs to run, whether it's PXN or PXGrid, I recommend it. You can use this file right there. That's equivalent to the 15 or the 55. The next one up has a bigger disk size, which is 600 gig, and this is recommended for the admin and monitoring node. Okay, just because I have the larger disk size, and as I mentioned earlier, even though it comes with 600, with the monitoring node, you might want to increase that if you need to keep the log longer. And then for the 3655 or the 95 equivalents of the large and the medium, or the medium and large rather, which is recommended for the admin monitoring. Again, this one actually comes with the 1.2 terabyte. And then I guess if you go with the large one, the 95, right? And this one comes with a 2.4 terabyte of disk space. Right, so those are the OVAs that are available, and you can pretty much use any one of these that fits your ICE design. And then I just want to point out that there's a ISO file down below right here for a full installation. And this is for both the 3500 and the 3600 model appliances. And one thing to notice is that the size of the ISO is actually almost half the size of the OVA. Again, one last thing, I cannot stress enough how important it is to have a proper disk space from day one, as ICE does not support disk resizing or expansion, and you would need to go through a fresh install to correct that with the bigger disk space. You're also going to need some ICE VM licenses, and as of version 2.4, you actually need the VM license with the correct size, whether it's small, medium, or large. Right? Instead, a generic VM license in the previous release. And we'll talk more about that later when we get to the licensing discussion. Then you need a DNS server with an A record of ICE created, the FQDN, which you will be using our Windows 2019 for in this case. You're going to need an NTP server that is reachable at the time of installation, and that's going to be our switch 1 loopback as well as the gateway IP address. Again, it's going to be switch 1, the .1 IP right there. All of these should be reachable because as we go through the installation, we'll see they actually perform the reachability check. Make sure that the virtualization technology, or VT, is enabled, and this is usually done under the BIOS of your compute. Right? And one way to check whether or not it's enabled, you can SSH into the ESXi. Let me do that real quick, just to show you. Oh, looks like I don't have SSH enabled right there, so let me do that real quick. Right here, go ahead and start that. And let me just restart the session. There you go. Log in. And then the command that you want is ESX cfg-info. And you can grep and look for the line that said HP support. Right there. If it says number 3, that means it's supported as well as it's being enabled. Let me go up. Yep, number 3 right there. If it shows it's number 2, it means it's your compute supports it, but it is disabled, in which case you have to go under the BIOS and then enable the virtualization technology. Right, just FYI on that. And then lastly, if you plan to do any kind of span-based probe, you need to enable promiscuous settings on the vSwitch that the ICE port is connected to. Right, and just FYI, the promiscuous setting is done under the switch, or actually you can do it, I believe, at the port group level as well, but let me show you at the switch level. So right there, if you go to, I guess, edit settings, security, and you can see right there, promiscuous mode. You need to change that from reject to accept. Since we don't plan to do any kind of span-based probe, we don't really need it. But again, just FYI on that. Now let's begin our installation of the VM. As you can see right here, I already have the LM-ICE1 up and running. To save us some time, I already did the initial VM creation for the ICE2, so we don't have to be sitting here waiting for that part to be done. What I'm going to show you is to how to create the VM, and then we're going to continue with the node that I've already created. All right, so to create the ICE VM, go ahead and click Create. The register virtual machine, and by the way, I'm just using the on-box, the VM web client here. If you are using a vCenter, it might look a little different, but the process should be very similar. We're going to use the OVF OVA file right here. Click Next. The name, I'm just going to say this is going to be LM-ICE2. And then we need to select a drag and drop no VA. I have a folder right here. Let me show you. I've already downloaded the eval one, which is the 3615.55.300. I'm just going to go ahead and simply drag that over. There you go. It's just a single file, 15 gig. Select the appropriate storage. Select the network that the NIC is going to be mapped into. For us, it's VLAN 32 server right there. Deployment type, you can see the OVA. This one in particular supports the eval small and medium, just like the descriptions on the download page. We're going to stick with the eval, and then whatever you selected, you will see that there's a note down below that says it's going to need 4 virtual CPU as well as 16 gig of memory. For disk provisioning, even though the thin provision is enabled in production, definitely if you can afford to reserve the disk storage, it is recommended to choose the thick. For us in the lab, we're going to leave it as thin, and we're not going to worry about powering on because this is just to give you an idea of how to create a VM. I'm not even going to click finish here because when I do that, it's basically going to go through and download the OVA file. That's going to take some time, and that's going to end up being the LM-ICE2 that I already have. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel this, but that's the process of creating the VM. If you are running, just FYI, the older version of ESXi 6.5, there was a known issue deploying ICE OVA. Although you may or may not run into that, it might get fixed in a later release. But if you do, then you need to use the OVF tool to perform the deployment instead. And we actually ran into this or show you this back in our ICE 2.2 VM installation video. So if you need more information, you want to check that out. Right now that the VM is created, I'm just going to continue with the LM-ICE2 that I already have. Let's do a quick review. You can see for guest OS perspective, it's a Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7, 64-bit. It comes with the VMware tool install. It has 4 CPU and 16 gig of memory, just the description set. We can take a look. Let me click edit on those. Yep, same deal, 4 CPU. Although one thing I find interesting is that for some reason this one doesn't come with the resource reservation as I believe it should. At least that's how it was in the previous version, so that might still need to be fixed, I would say. So if you looked under the CPU and you do not see any kind of reservation, you definitely want to do that, especially again in the production. Okay, so in the reservation, because we have 4 core of CPU, you might set 4,000. You just have to do your calculation and make sure you do the correct reservation there. Okay, we're not going to do that in our lab. The same thing with the memory, 16 gig. There's no reservations. You might want to come in here and set, in our case, 16 gig and reserve that as a base practice. From the hard disk space is 300 gig. We chose thin provision, so that's what we got. And then even though when we did the install, it only showed up as one. I guess it didn't show up as an adapter, it just said choose a network. So whatever network that you chose, or the port group, it gets assigned to all of the 6 virtual adapter on the VM, as you can see, 1 through 6. And we selected VLAN 32. Okay, and it looks like the OVA is using the E1000 adapter type. Okay, so that's what the configuration of an ICE VM looks like. In our case, it's the eval, or I guess the small, medium 3615.55 with 300 gig disk space. Okay, I'm going to cancel out of that, and now I'm going to go ahead and start the VM. Let's go ahead and open the console. Give it a few seconds here. With the OVA, it shouldn't take too long to boot up, unlike the ISO. You can see it's probably within a minute here, and now we get a setup prompt. To go through a setup, you type setup for a login, and then go ahead and just kind of move down to the bottom of the screen there. The first thing that you need to provide is the host name of the server. For us is LM-ICE2. And hopefully you already have all these information handy. IP address for us is 172.16.32.103. Again, just make sure you double check, make sure there's no typo before hitting enter, because once you make that mistake, it's cumbersome to come back and fix it. So 172.16.32.103 there. Net mask 255.255.255.0 for us, /24. For a default gateway, 32.1. We're not going to deal with IPv6, although it is supported. For the domain name, okay, we're going to do ice.labminutes.com. Even though our main domain name is labminutes.com, we have decided to put this ice in the subdomain, which is a subdomain ice, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the certificate installation. There's a good reason why you might want to do this. Go ahead, hit enter. For the name server, 172.16.32.40, which is our domain controller. For the name server, we do not have a secondary name server, so skip that. For NTP, it's our switch loopback 16.01. And we're not going to add, just have one NTP server there. For time zone, for us is US/Pacific. We definitely want to enable SSH for remote access. And then this is where you provide username and password by default as admin. No need to change that. And then provide the password. So you can see that ICE is in the process of bringing up network and interface now. In a second, it's going to try to reach out. First default gateway, right? Then the DNS server as well as the NTP server. So give that a second, and the message will show that as well. You can see right there, pinging the gateway. Yep, and then also ping the primary name server and go through the disk IO's performance testing, and then show you the test result of the writing and the reading. Yep, and at the end, right, it will show whether or not the performance actually meets the performance guideline. Right, in our case, it definitely is supported. And at this point, once you see this message right here, I'm just going to continue with the installation. So there's not much that you need to do depending on how powerful your server is. Right, the time that it takes for the installation to complete might vary. Usually, it should complete within an hour. So for us, what we're going to do is to switch gear while this thing is happening in the background. We are now going to be talking about licensing while we're waiting for the installation to finish.